The sound that broke the silence was not that of a voice. It was the sound of laughter. First one coming from the presenter on stage, then dozens, and within seconds, a wave of hundreds of laughs and embarrassed whispers spread through the auditorium like wildfire. In the center of the stage, under hot lights that seemed to burn his skin, Leo Schmidt was paralyzed in his wheelchair. His finger hovered over the tablet screen, where the words of his speech glowed, ready to be heard. But a technical problem with the sound and the impatience of the master of ceremonies turned a moment of hope into a spectacle of public humiliation. "It looks like the modem is disconnected," said the man on the microphone, and the audience laughed again, laughing at the silence of a boy who had the whole universe to share. A question for you who are following us. From what corner of Brazil or the world are you watching this story? Leave your comment. We want to know how far our voice reaches. And if you feel that this is just the beginning of an incredible turnaround, don't waste any time. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Justice sometimes takes time, but when it comes, it is overwhelming. To understand the depth of that silence on stage, you have to know Isabella, Leo's older sister. For her, his silence was never empty. It was a language. From an early age, she was his interpreter, not of words, but of intentions. Leo was born with a form of cerebral palsy that affected his mobility and speech but left his mind, a brilliant and tireless mind, perfectly intact. Autism, diagnosed later, was just another layer, one that made the outside world seem chaotic and aggressive, but gave him an almost superhuman ability to focus and perceive patterns. While other children played tag, Isabella and Leo spent hours in the garden. He, in his chair, would point with his eyes at a leaf, and she knew he wasn't just seeing a leaf, but the geometry of its veins, the dance of light on its surface, the cycle of life and death contained within it. Isabella remembers with quiet fury all the times the world tried to diminish her brother, the doctors who talked about him as if he weren't there, the teachers who put him at the back of the classroom, assuming that his inability to hold a pencil was a sign of an inability to learn. The fight for access ramps was the easy part. The real fight was for access to his mind. She was the one who insisted that her parents give him a communication tablet. And when Leo touched that screen for the first time, it was like a dam burst. Years of observation, complex thoughts, silent philosophy began to flow in perfectly constructed sentences. He didn't write about trivial things. He wrote about the nature of consciousness, the ethics of technology, the beauty hidden in mathematics. He was a poet, a scientist, and a philosopher trapped in a body that the world judged before reading the first line he had to say. For Isabella, the pain of seeing him ridiculed on that stage was not just the pain of humiliation. It was the pain of seeing an entire library being judged by its cover, a cover that the world was too lazy to open. The invitation to speak at the Global Youth Forum seemed like a miracle. Leo had submitted an essay anonymously, with only his name and age, without mentioning his condition. The text, about how future technologies could build bridges for people with disabilities instead of deepening chasms, was selected from thousands of others. For the first time, his ideas had been chosen on their own merit. The hope that gripped the Schmidt family was palpable, electric. It was the chance of a lifetime, proof that they had been right all along. The preparations were a military operation of love and anxiety. Weeks were spent adapting Leo's wheelchair for air travel. Isabella bought 3 external batteries for the tablet, afraid that the most important tool would fail. Leo spent sleepless nights refining every word of his speech. He wasn't just writing sentences, he was composing a symphony. Each word was a note, each pause a calculated breath. He rehearsed with text-to-speech software dozens of times, adjusting the speed, tone, and cadence so that the robotic voice could convey as much human emotion as possible. His parents spent savings they didn't have to buy tickets and book an accessible hotel. They believed with all their hearts that this event would be the turning point. It would be the day the world finally stopped to listen to what their genius son had to say. They imagined the applause, the respect, the people coming up to greet him afterward, amazed by his intelligence. That hope was so great and so bright that it blinded them to the casual cruelty the world was capable of. The stage was bigger and brighter than they had imagined. The master of ceremonies, a man named Marco with a white smile and a fake tan, announced Leo with condescension disguised as enthusiasm. And now a story of overcoming adversity. Leo Schmidt. Isabella led him to the center of the stage, connected the tablet cable to the sound system, and kissed him on the forehead. "It's your time, brother. Kill it." But the technology failed. A low hum was all that came out of the speakers when Leo pressed play on his first sentence. A technician rushed to the stage, fiddling with cables, while the silence stretched on. Leo remained calm, waiting, but the audience began to stir, impatient. Marco, the presenter trying to fill the void, approached Leo. "Any technical problems, champ? Want to try again?" Leo nodded and tried once more. Nothing. The buzzing persisted. It was then that Marco, in a disastrous attempt to be funny and control the situation, uttered the phrase that poisoned the air. "Calm down, folks, it happens. Looks like the cat ate your tongue. Or maybe your modem is disconnected." The laughter that followed was not universal, but it was loud enough. It was a laugh of discomfort, of arrogance, of relief that they were not in that position. For Leo, that sound was physical aggression. The lights, the noise, the expectation, and now the humiliation. It was too much. He went into sensory overload, a shutdown. His hand froze on the tablet, his gaze became vacant, and he withdrew into himself, to the only safe place he knew. Isabella, seeing what was happening from the wings, felt no sadness. She felt volcanic rage. She ran onto the stage. Ignoring Marco and the technicians, placed herself between her brother and the thousands of people who were looking at him like a circus attraction, and got him out of there as fast as she could. The conflict was not with a villain, but with something much more frightening: collective ignorance and the ease with which people choose laughter over empathy. Backstage, in a cold, anonymous hallway, Isabella's anger gave way to pain. Leo was silent, rocking back and forth in his chair, a movement to regulate himself. The speech, the masterpiece that had taken him weeks to create, still glowed on the forgotten screen in his lap. It was in that moment of desolation that a young woman approached him. She was not an event organizer or an important figure. Her name was Anya, a Polish intern at a small independent news blog assigned to cover the event. She didn't bring a microphone, but 2 bottles of water and a look of deep shame for what she had witnessed. "I'm so sorry," she said with a heavy accent. What happened there was horrible. Isabella, normally protective and closed off, was so hurt that she simply let it all out. Horrible. They laughed at him. They laughed because the sound didn't work. Do you want to know what they missed? Do you want to see what he was going to say? In a gesture of anger and pride, Isabella grabbed the tablet and showed the screen to Anya. Anya began to read, and as she read, her face changed. Pity gave way to astonishment. Astonishment gave way to admiration. The words on the screen were not those of a victim. They were those of a leader, a visionary. They spoke about how empathy should be the source code of all innovation, and how true disability is not having a body or a brain that works differently, but having a soul that is incapable of connecting with others. She was silent for a long time after she finished. Then she looked at Isabella and made a request that would change everything. Can I take a picture of that? Please, people need to read this." That night, Anya didn't write the article her editor was expecting. She wrote a blog post with a simple title, the speech an entire auditorium chose not to hear. She described the humiliating scene and then transcribed Leo's speech word for word. It was an act of silent rebellion, a bottle thrown into the digital ocean with no guarantee it would ever be found. She published it and went to sleep, feeling a mixture of fear and conviction. Her first victory was waking up to her phone vibrating nonstop. Anya's post, the little message in the bottle, had been found and shared and commented on, first by dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of people. The hashtag #LetLeoSpeak began trending, not just in the country, but in various places around the world. The narrative began to shift. The story was no longer about a disabled boy who was ridiculed. It was about a brilliant speech that was silenced. People with disabilities and their families shared their own stories of humiliation and invisibility. The collective anger turned into a wave of support. The second victory was the apology email from the Global Youth Forum, which sounded empty and corporate. The third, much more satisfying, was the video of Marco, the presenter, apologizing publicly, his arrogant smile replaced by an expression of panic as he saw his career crumble. But these were small, reactive victories. The real victory, the one that changed the game, came in an email with a domain that made Isabella hold her breath, eun.org. It was from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. A press officer had seen the viral story and read Leo's speech. He wasn't interested in the scandal. He was interested in the ideas. The email was short and to the point. They considered Leo Schmidt's words a vital contribution to the global discussion on inclusion and human dignity, and would like to request permission to publish it on their official website and distribute it through their global channels. They didn't want the story of humiliation. They wanted the glory of his words. At that moment, the sound of laughter in the auditorium was finally, and forever, drowned out by the sound of global recognition. The publication of the speech by the UN was a watershed moment. Suddenly, Leo was no longer the wheelchair boy who was ridiculed. He was Leo Schmidt, the young philosopher whose essay on empathy and technology was highlighted by the United Nations. The change in status was dizzying, but the internal change was even more profound. Isabella watched her brother and saw a new calm. He did not revel in his sudden fame, but seemed relieved, as if a weight he had carried his entire life had finally been lifted. He communicated with her one night, typing slowly on his tablet. "They didn't hear my voice, so the world gave my soul a megaphone." Isabella reflected on the irony of it all. The worst day of their lives had become the gateway to the greatest opportunity they had ever had. She understood that their struggle had never been for Leo to be normal. The fight was for the world to be fairer, and in a twisted and unexpected way, they had won an important battle. The humiliation they suffered exposed a wound in society, a tendency to discard what is not immediately understandable. And Leo's speech, now read by millions, was the antidote. The reflection became global. Articles were written not about the drama, but about the ideas in the speech. University professors used it in ethics classes. Activist groups adopted it as a manifesto. Leo's wisdom, once confined to his bedroom and his small family circle, now belonged to the world. He had proven that a brilliant mind does not need a conventional body to express itself, and that the most powerful voice can sometimes be a silent voice that has the courage to write the truth. The lesson was not just about disability, it was about listening, about the responsibility we all have to look for value in people, rather than expecting them to present themselves in a format that is convenient for us. The Schmidts' lives did not turn into a Hollywood movie. The care routine, the architectural barriers, Leo's social anxiety, all of that remains part of their daily reality. The scar from that day on stage will never completely disappear. It will serve as an eternal reminder of the fragility of human dignity and the ease with which cruelty can manifest itself. But something fundamental has changed. Leo has found his platform. He no longer needs to shout to be heard. The world now leans in to listen to him. He receives invitations to contribute articles to international publications, participates in panel discussions, virtually on his own terms, and has become an advisory voice for technology companies seeking to develop truly inclusive products. The UN not only published his speech, they invited him to participate in a youth committee on digital rights. The hope that blossomed from this experience is not a naive hope. It is a hope forged in the fire of humiliation and solidified by the strength of truth. It is the certainty that, while there are many Marcos in the world, there are also Anyas willing to do the right thing, and that, in the end, powerful ideas have a way of finding their way into the light. Leo's happiness did not come from overcoming his disabilities, but from the world finally beginning to overcome its own prejudices. His voice was not found on stage under the spotlight, but in the quiet of his room, where it had always been, waiting patiently to be read. Sometimes the loudest voice in the world doesn't need sound, it just needs to be read. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel, made you think, made you cheer, then be part of our movement. Like, comment with your thoughts, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Someone, somewhere, may need to hear that their voice matters, no matter how it presents itself.